Okay, so my topic was complication avoidance and management patients with spine tumors. I will mostly focus. Okay, so it's avoidance I will be talking about mainly. And the first thing you have to do if you treat patients with spinal tumors, be it secondary especially, or if it's primary, you have to change your mindset because nothing is as it used to be. With the advent of that targeted therapy, these patients, at least a significant percentage of these patients, have become patients with a chronic disease, not a deadly disease. So this is the first thing to remember. So you're not treating someone who has cancer anyway, so you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It matters the most for these patients. So, and that means you have to accept your role in the management of these patients. I mean, it's hard for your ego, but you're not the most important player. You're just here to keep the patient functionally independent, without pain, without neurodeficit, walking, and that's it. But the most important player will always be the oncologist or the one that treats the primary tumor. So you need to consult with him, except in some emergent situations, what to do and how. And you have to establish a really, really close relationship with these people. Otherwise, you will fail. Next thing is also something about mindset. You have to accept that you do have complications. Sometimes I feel that I'm the only one having complications. And this is a paper that's been written where Bernhard Meyer did a prospective series in our department, more than 5,000 surgeries within 1 year. On a daily basis, every complication was recorded and discussed among attending. So more than 5,000 surgeries, 20%. That means every fifth of your patient will have some form of complication. Now, most people would say, well, most of these complications are minor. For a cancer patient, what you consider a minor complication can be a major, mostly a major complication, because it influences the time he has to live. For example, wound problems. Up to 30% of your patients with spine tumors will have wound problems. What is a nuisance to a DGEM patient may cost the spinal oncology patient years of his life because you discontinue his targeted therapy and the other local therapy, that means radiotherapy, and that influences his prognosis. So avoiding even minor complications is of utmost importance. This is taken from Arthur Wagner's review of our cases, and it shows clearly that the major driver for early morbidity and mortality in tumor patient, spinal metastasis patient, is a surgical complication. So avoiding that is extremely important. Next thing, also mindset, I think. Timing matters, according to me. That's another paper by Hanno about all our patients were symptomatic with neurologic deficits in that group of patients that we had. And he just looked at those who were operated less than 12 hours or more than 12 hours after onset of their neurological deficit. It makes a difference. So in my department, patient comes in, has a deficit, there's no reason to wait. You do it in nighttime. And if you can't provide that service 24/7, you're not the right guy to provide care to those patients. I know that sounds rude to many, but that's a very clear opinion that I have. Avoiding these wound problems and other things, we have developed that concept that we're trying to be minimally invasive. That means at least as less invasive than we can to reduce these wound problems. For that, we use the navigation in all cases because we don't want to revise our hardware. We used very liberally cement-augmented screws for a stable construct that will hold for a couple of years because I don't believe in fusion in these patients. And we use radiolucent implants because they have some benefit for the patients. This is just one of the papers showing you that surgical site infections are drastically lower if you use minimally invasive approaches in patients with spinal metastasis, but there are other papers too. This is just one of many papers showing you that you reduce your revision rate to 30% of your pedicle screws if you use navigation for that. And then the reason why probably you and I have a different approach when it comes to whatever you might call separation surgery in those patients is that in order not to do an open approach from behind and then get the tumor off the dura from behind, we do it in a stage or in a one-stage PA fashion. We do percutaneous screws in the back, then turn the patient laterally, do a minimally invasive approach, and then do that type of separation surgery that I would consider appropriate by just liberating the dura. And then it only takes another 5 minutes to put in an anterior construct. So that would be the default case that we would have in a patient with any type of metastasis coming into my place. So we can debate about that or discuss about that, but that's what I consider separation surgery, because I don't take the tumor out en bloc or completely. I just liberate the dura. We have learned that cement augmented screws can be dangerous. This is a highly cited paper from Inza Janssen where she showed in our large series that any type of leakage is very common. More than 66% of patients have that. A lot go into the pulmonary cement embolism. Most of them are asymptomatic, but there are also symptomatic ones. Patients have sometimes an anaphylactic reaction to that. You have these epidural leakages. And so total of symptomatic complications, if you use it very liberally, up to 5% and a 30-day mortality of 2%. That means patients die from that. So we have reduced that, especially in patients with right heart failure. We try to avoid it. In other patients in a thoracic spine, we tend only, if we have 3 above, 3 below, to do the upper or the upper 2 or the lower 2. So in order to reduce that risk. Just a little bit to primary tumors. You know, with primary tumors, your first shot is actually the best shot. In these patients, because it's actually an orphan disease, you have to also change your mindset. This is a chordoma patient. What we nowadays do, if we think we can't get the complete resection with anything appropriate margins, we think neoadjuvant. That means these patients get neoadjuvant radiotherapy, and then we do the en bloc. Either we can then contain the epidural mass with the en bloc resection, or we think we have a sterile field. In a tumor patient like that, with a huge sacral chordoma, for example, the use of navigation will avoid getting into the tumor or not having a R0 resection in that patient. No matter how good you are or you think you're a lot safer, or your resection margins with your chisel or whatever you use are a lot safer if you use navigation for that. So we do that too. So just to avoid complication. For management, just shortly, because it's not so different from any other type of spine surgery, one of the things we have alluded to was peak instrumentation. It helps you in the immediate post-op setting. If a patient wakes up and has a deficit, you can do an MR and can basically rule out or show an epidural hematoma. In that case, it was an ischemia, so we didn't need to open up the patient again because we could see it was an ischemia from an embolization and no epidural hematoma that caused the neurological deficit. With the anterior approaches, there may be a difference also, because I know that most of you use access surgeons, which we don't, because we don't have these legal constraints that you have. But actually, it's not so bad. So there are two things that are in danger, usually the ureter. What you do in a redo, avoidance again, you stent them. If you see a problem, you immediately react and do a percutaneous, let the urologist do a percutaneous fistula, an end-to-end anastomosis, or a stent. You always have to have a very high index of suspicion for that. And to avoid that is don't touch the ureter, just leave it in this peritoneal sleeve and get immediately in a retroperitoneal approach. That's the easiest way to avoid that. Vascular, actually to nick an artery in an anterior approach is something which rarely happens or almost never. If you have a compression problem in older patients where you do have some calcification, then you have an ischemic problem. But if you have a bleeding problem, it's going to be for a vein or a venous problem. So if you especially do that, oops, the video doesn't run. I just wanted to show you how I nicked the vein, but can't. And show you the only thing you don't have to do is panic because there's a lot of blood coming out, but just use your finger and then you wait for your vascular surgeon to come. Usually you can do it yourself. Stitching a vein is not so difficult if you do it often enough, but it doesn't happen very often. It happens in tumors. If it's a redo, it happens in infections, but usually in a virgin case, it does not happen. So actually, that's all I have to say in these 15 minutes that I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So as always, very concise and very nice articles. Let me ask you some practical questions, and I'll ask my colleagues here to weigh in. Some little tidbits like wound closure. So this is one of those things where I see a lot of sloppiness because you spent a lot of time in the OR and then some people just put some staples on. Is there a protocol for proper wound management, especially if you get into the lumbosacral zone, to not have fecal midline contamination, stuff like that? Do you have a protocol for oncologic patients?
Yeah, sure. Staples are out. We don't use staples for many, many years now. It's always sutures. And then the wound dressing and the way you change it is obviously also a given. So that's quite clear. And I know, yeah, at the end of a long surgery, it gets sloppy. That's the reason why I never do my wound closure alone. Or do my wound closures myself, but let it do by one of my colleagues who has the patience to do so. But they have a clear SOP on how to do it.
So that's, I think, important. And then talk about optimization of patients. So we have a very powerful kind of a complications panel here in our healthcare system of 52 hospitals, and they look at all these variables for infections. And so nutritional optimization in these frequently cachectic patients, we have a Karnofsky index. Does that matter? A1C maintenance, is that a factor that you, for instance, look at to try to optimize your patients? How long would you give a patient to try to optimize their nutrition, for instance?
That's a very difficult topic because you can talk days over that. I'm not a big fan of optimization of patients with cancer because it usually doesn't work. If a patient comes in cachectic, he does have a higher risk for any type of complications anyway. So you have to take your chances or you don't. If you say, okay, we optimize the patient for another let's say how much, 6 weeks, there won't be a lot of difference in that. So we don't do that, to be honest.
Fair. And final question, timing. So we heard from Yale before that we should wait for 3 weeks after radiation. Talk to us about the timing of surgery, either before or after, for chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and radiation therapy. Is there a magic number? We heard the magic number of 3 weeks. Give us a plus minus before and after.
That's a gut feeling. There's no hard figures and data to guide you in that. I would say 2 weeks, but That's a gut feeling as well. So, but that's about 2 weeks I would give.
Hey,
Great.
Bernard, that was a great talk. I just have a quick question on, and you and I have talked about this before. You really inspired me to do minimally invasive, especially for tumors. Um, what's your thought on, you and I have talked about this before, about let's say if you're doing you showed some beautiful cases like, T10 to pelvis or T10 to S1. What's your management for the skin incision, and how do you do multiple stab incisions, or do you
Mm.
do one, or do you
Mm.
do one single incision laterally?
We have started, or I have started
Mhm.
very liberally, leaving it up to the surgeon if he does stab incisions or long incisions. But the only true difference is actually between open and stab incision,
Yeah.
because open and long incision is basically the same infection rate. So now for, I would say, 6 years, it's only stab.
hmm And I've seen that in my practice. I mean, and I think Jens pointed out earlier, especially if they're going to get radiation after surgery. I have not, knock on wood, my infection rate with the stab incisions is so low.
Yeah, ours too.
And
But I don't want to talk about it because otherwise it
yeah,
goes up again.
yeah. And even though, it looks terrible sometimes because you have like 10 little
I know.
incisions, but those things, like, I mean, they heal so quickly.
Yeah.
And you don't have the wound drainage, you don't
No,
have all,
nothing.
and it's unbelievable. And I think you're the one that convinced me to do this. I think you showed some data in your center. I think you actually published it, but
Yeah.
it's amazing to me, like these tiny little incisions heal within a week,
Mm.
and they're not draining, you don't have to worry about. And so it's really changed my practice. So it sounds like you're still doing the same thing then.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not, they don't look good. It's not that the
Yeah,
patient
no,
is
it looks terrible, but it heals fast.
Yeah.
So great. Awesome talk. Great to see you, Bernard.
Yeah. Hey
Thank
there,
you.
quick question for both you guys. One of the things that has pushed me, and this Amir Abdul-Jabbar, if you can't see me on screen, pushed me away from doing some of these cases percutaneous. I do worry about the management of the anterior corpectomy and how aggressive you can be in terms of taking that tumor off of the dura anteriorly. Could you guys give us some insights as to how you approach that while you're using that technique?
Yeah, that's actually very easy. It's easier than coming from the back. I do that basically on a daily basis, and my people too. You look at the dura, you have a slight oblique angle. You're standing anterior to the patient. You have a slightly oblique angle, and you know exactly where the dura is. I mean, if initially you're not sure in the thoracic spine what you do, the trick is take away the head of the rib and then see where the foramen is, and you know exactly where the dura is. So it's really easy. It's easier than coming from the back.
Yeah, Amir, I'm going to talk about it in my talk, but I agree with Bernard. I do a lot of lateral corpectomies, and you can see the dura very easily. And I'll show some cases where you can really separate the anterior column from the dura. So
Great stuff. Thank you again, Bernhard. Thanks for joining us from Munich.
Thanks, guys. Have a good
great
rest.
talk, Bernard.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Next, we'll go to Dr. Mickey Katzir, Assistant Professor of Neurosurgery and the Director of Spine Surgical Oncology at Nebraska Medicine, Omaha, Nebraska. Mickey, you've been very patient. You've been here from the beginning. And he's going to give us a little bit more scientific background on the use of carbon fiber implants in spinal metastasis surgery. And by the way, the company that exhibited before, they told us that the push and pull out strength of screws to rods is the same to titanium. So this is a little biomechanical update. Mickey, the floor is yours, or the screen is yours, should I say.